Take my little tag down. Okay. And we are back on the 0 hour. Joining me once again is Sonali Kolhatkar. You know her, but just in case you don't, she is the host of Rising Up with Sonali, a radio program, and much more. She is also senior correspondent with the 0 hour, and she joins us today to talk about Trump's big, beautiful bill, so called, which as we speak, has just passed a hurdle in the House of Representatives, and its fate is uncertain, but its intent seems pretty clear. She'll tell us. So, Sonali is always welcome back.
Thank you so much, Richard. This bill is a huge bill, and the big, beautiful bill is a big part of it. The beautiful is precisely the opposite. And just before you ask me the first question, I just think that it's so indicative of how sycophantic the GOP is that they basically lifted a phrase that Trump likes to use to describe his legislation and put it in the official title of the bill in caps. If you go online and look for this tax bill, it is in the official description of the tax bill. It is called the quote, the one comma, big comma, beautiful bill, and it's in all caps. I mean,
I
how'd
didn't
you?
know the all caps. That's like it's a Trump Truth Social post, right?
Yes. Trump Truth Social is turning into legislation, and it's as terrifying as that sounds.
So I was just looking at trying to get the big picture of it because I knew you've been looking into this, and I see that tax breaks, which will presumably mostly go to billionaires, 3.8 billion, a little bit more. Increased defense spending as if we needed that, 144 billion, 177 billion homeland security, other costs 150 billion. Then there's addition to the national debt, and then it looks like the bulk of the savings would be from cutting Medicaid. So far, am I more or less on the right track?
Yeah, let me get a little bit broader and also slightly deeper into it. So the upshot of it is that, this is a many hundreds pages long bill. I also want to sort of just clarify that it started out in the House Ways and Means Committee. It was passed out of committee, and it is now at the just past the House of Representatives late Sunday night. There may be some small changes in it here and there, but by and large, the bill does several, actually many things, but the highlights are that it makes permanent some very important aspects of the 2017 tax reform bill that Trump passed during his first term. That was basically this huge giveaway to corporations and wealthy individuals. It also cuts Medicaid to pay for those tax breaks, to pay for the tax savings. The less you tax corporations and the wealthy, the less money you get in the federal revenue treasury. And in order to make up for that, because we have expenses such as things that we all need, they want to cut Medicaid. They're also making clear that immigrants, cannot in any way be allowed to participate in, or they're basically making sure that immigrants will never be able to access Medicaid. They also do one really crucial thing, which is it strips away taxes for ordinary Americans and especially the poorest Americans. It takes away taxes on tips. It takes away taxes on Social Security income. Why does it do that? First of all, the GOP loves the idea of cutting taxes on everybody because that reduces the power of government, and then that also reduces the responsibility of government to pay for services for people. And another thing is basically it's a bribe for the American people. If you get a check from the IRS refunding you, or the next year you don't owe as many taxes, you're going to feel so much better about the government, and you're going to be distracted from the fact that there's less money coming into the treasury because we've given it away to corporations. And you may not connect that the reason you can't access Medicaid is the same reason you're getting extra money in your hand right now. It's a bribe to distract ordinary people from the fact that we're cutting Medicaid to pay for billionaire tax breaks. And at the very last minute, they snuck in a failed piece of legislation that was dubbed the Nonprofit Killer Bill, which is basically attacking Americans' right to free speech. So this one bill makes corporations and wealthy Americans wealthier, attacks the poorest Americans, distracts us with shiny objects such as small checks that we might get, attacks immigrants, and curbs free speech. And no wonder they call it the one big beautiful bill. It is literally a laundry list of their wildest dreams.
And of course, by throwing them all at us at once, it's kind of like the first 100 days of Trump's administration, kind of just shock and awe the public, I think, so they can't follow it all. But before we move into the nonprofit killer bill, which I think is important, I'm looking at a graph. I don't know if it's changed since then, but in addition to, first of all, let's talk about that money coming back to working people. If they don't pay into Social Security for tips, they'll get less in Social Security benefits at the end of the day.
That's a good point. Absolutely.
Right. And secondly, first of all, a lot of tip income isn't recorded. So it's, and thirdly, that is in raw dollar terms, small, but are there other breaks for working people that I don't know about besides, and by the way, the Democrats foolishly embraced the idea in last year's presidential election. Instead of explaining the problems with it, they said, oh, great idea, we want that too. So what anything else for working people, or even
there's one thing that it would increase the child tax credit, which might be the only slightly positive thing in this enormous bill. The child tax credit, if people remember, was something that was enacted during the early years of the COVID pandemic, where basically working families who had children, for every child you had, you got back a portion of your refund, and that really actually a portion of your taxes, and that really actually helped lift a lot of people out of poverty. A lot of working families were able to make ends meet. A child tax credit would be, it's still a band-aid, because it still doesn't account for or address the fact that people are getting paid far too little. But nonetheless, it's a more progressive taxation, right? We want progressive taxation where the poorest people are taxed the least amount, the richest pay the most. That's equity. Republicans hate that word, but we need a progressive tax system. So the child tax credit, which is being extended and might increase a little bit under this bill temporarily, is another sort of bribe for the American people to distract us from the fact that at the same time they're cutting corporate taxes.
And it did, as you say, help cut poverty, help cut child poverty, but the material I'm looking at says that this bill would also cut $230 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance
Food
Program,
stamps.
SNAP. So it seems to me that they're helping working families with children with one hand and taking away with the other.
Yeah, the Republican ethos is government shouldn't give you anything. We'll just ensure that you keep more of your meager income. We won't do anything to ensure your income ever increases, but you get to keep more of it. And then you're on your own. You go off into the sunset. You figure out how to survive. You don't rely on government for anything. When you slip under the poverty line, when you go into bankruptcy, when you can't pay your bills, that's on you, because we've just given you all the money that we could possibly give you that we would have normally paid into the government to get services. They love this. And the reason why low-income Americans especially should be the most wary of this, even if it means having $500 in hand, you might be getting $500 in hand, but you're losing thousands and thousands of dollars of services that you should be relying on for the government, because we all together pay into the system that then the least fortunate among us draw on the most. That is equity. It reminds me of the same conversation we had around the Postal Service recently, Richard, which is that you and I would pay the exact same amount for a postage stamp as somebody in rural Maine or Idaho, even though it costs the post office a lot more to deliver and get mail from those addresses. The idea is that we put the same amount on, or we put according to our means, and those who need it the most draw from it. That's how it's wealth redistribution. It's a way that society looks out for each other. People look out for each other in a society. It's collective care. So Republicans absolutely want you to keep more of your meager income and get almost nothing or very, very little from government that you rely on. And it's a way to distract people. Now, taxes on tips, I think we've talked about that too. If Republicans really cared about tipped workers and the fact that tipped service workers are the least paid in our society because it's legal for them to be paid below minimum wage, all we have to do is get rid of that exception for tipped workers and ensure that they are required to be paid the minimum wage, then raise that minimum wage so that they don't need to rely on tips to begin with. And suddenly it's a non-issue, and we don't have to talk about taxes on tips. We don't even have to talk about tips. And we need to get rid of our tipping culture after we start ensuring that tipped workers get paid a living wage, because it's out of control. It's ridiculous. Customers are asked to subsidize the low wages of workers, and it's enough. But they don't want to have that conversation.
No, they don't. And lastly, on the financial side of this, it has been, and speaking of sort of a community attitude towards governance, we have argued for a long time in this country that education is a social good. It's not just something that benefits the person being educated, it benefits society as a whole. I mean, that's been the principle since the land grant colleges of the 19th century. So I think we shouldn't overlook the fact that unless something's changed that I've missed, this bill also would cut education, including new limits on Pell Grants, and that is $351 billion over 10 years, which to me is just another erosion or destruction of the common good.
And it also lifts up charter schools and the school choice, so-called choice movement. That's another thing built into this, that it would essentially give private schools and charter schools and the proponents of school vouchers the same benefits as public education recipients. It is tucking into its many pages the wish list of Republicans wanting to strip away and completely hamper government's ability to take care of its people. Now, it's come out of the House, which is a huge problem. And by the way, the reason why, after the House Ways and Means Committee passed the bill, and there was a moment where it wasn't clear it would pass the House of Representatives. The reason for that wasn't that House Representatives voted saying, this is too much of a giveaway to the rich. They didn't think it went far enough in cutting programs. It was the hardliners, the hardline Republicans, who thought that this bill was not cruel enough, that they held it back briefly, and they were assuaged, and they're holding their nose and voting for this bill that passed Sunday night. Now it heads to the Senate, and the Senate is where there's a slimmer majority for the Republicans. It is the only hope preventing this bill from coming into law if people want to stop the cuts to Medicaid and all the other things built into it. We didn't even talk about the nonprofit killer bill. Call every senator you possibly can. I hope Bernie Sanders, I'm sure he will take a leadership role, but he's got to corral and pull away just a handful of Republicans, however he can, from supporting this bill and try to kill it on the Senate floor.
Now, because it's financial, a little bit of Senate arcana here, because it's fiscal in nature, they don't need to break the filibuster. 51 votes is enough to pass this, right?
I believe so. I believe you're right. I haven't confirmed that, but that basically sounds the way previous budget bills have gone. And I'm assuming that even though they've added all sorts of non-budgetary things to this bill, that this is essentially the same thing. And also, we have to be clear, because this is a budget bill, it isn't a matter of let's kill this bill. They have to pass a budget. And so the question becomes, what can go into this budget that this hardline Republican faction, and the entire party is hardline, will accept and allow. We're looking at an absolute potential stalemate here, but this is an existential issue. Do we think that government is in the business of serving the people or serving the wealthy?
And to that point, Sonali, I just wanted to say, you mentioned some of the holdouts who finally gave up and voted present rather than against it, like Representative Chip Roy. Of course, what they always do when they want to cut government services to working people is they always say, well, we can't afford it and we don't want to increase the deficit. But here is a bill that has nearly $4 trillion in tax cuts and other tax provisions, increases deficit spending over the next 10 years by $3.2 billion at the same time that Trump's erratic policies have weakened global confidence in the dollar. So if the world's economy ever divests itself of its linkage to the dollar, while they're raising the total debt ceiling by $4 trillion. If it ever comes to that, this bill could actually be the turning point that people look back on that led us into a depression.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much at stake here. I don't want to sound like this is the sky is falling aspect, but look, given the speed and ferocity with which the Trump administration ran out the gate in its first day or two in office, and then its first few weeks in office, it's only May of the first, it's the first half of the first year of a 4-year term. And they are throwing everything they can, because Republicans, the one thing they do so well is they play hardball so well. Can you imagine if in the first 6 months of Biden's administration, he had put together a bill that was so ambitious and so vast and so progressive and so hardball on the left that Republicans would have had to fight to get rid of the most, radical aspects of it, and we would have still passed something fairly progressive. Democrats never play like that. They never get that aggressive because, of course, unfortunately, they too are not the friend of the working class and of working, of the middle class, for that matter, in the United States. And so we don't see this kind of hardball from Democrats because they are just perfectly fine with the status quo. And when they fight, it's to fight to preserve the status quo, if that.
Well, and before we go, the status quo in this case being a lurch to the right that never seems to end. But before we go, another provision of this law, you mentioned free speech earlier. It's the so-called nonprofit killer provision that they tried to pass, I think last year, maybe. But tell us about that before we go, because that's sort of insult to injury.
Yes, this was a bill that originated during Biden's term when Democrats were all for the idea of stripping away nonprofit status from organizations that critiqued pro-Israel policy. Then when it came into the hands of Trump, when basically the Congress knew that Trump was elected after November, they backpedaled because they realized that in the wrong hands, or even in the right hands, in any hands, this bill is incredibly dangerous. You started to see Democratic and Republican opposition to it. The bill failed last year, and it's basically it's called the original bill was called the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act, which has nothing to do with what's in the bill, and now it has been copy pasted into this new big beautiful tax bill, and they're trying to slip it. And this is so dangerous. Anybody who has nonprofit status that Trump thinks is his enemy, and it would put the entire onus on making that decision. I believe it's the Department of Commerce or the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury gets broad and unilateral discretion to strip organizations of their tax-exempt status without any due process or any evidence beyond the accusation that they support terrorism. I'm quoting from a Mother Jones article that reported on this. And this is really really terrifying. So they're trying to stick this in here as well. This entire bill needs to be completely reworked. And please,
Absolutely. And
listeners, call the
this is
senators.
not only an assault on free speech, but Sonali, it occurred to me as we were talking, this is also a tax increase on rich people. Because if rich people want to support speech that the White House doesn't like, now they won't get a tax break for it. So in
Yeah, their
every
favorite
way,
organizations are, if their favorite organizations are stripped of tax status, nonprofit status, then you're right, they won't get their tax exemption. I don't
so
know.
right everywhere you look, there's hypocrisy as well as venality. I don't know a better word
Yeah.
for it. So yes, this bill, this so-called one big beautiful bill, interesting name in it because it doesn't tell you anything about what's actually in it.
Exactly. It's like, and that's part of the cult of personality that Trump has developed. If it is labeled in a Trumpian way, all that they need to do is signal that to Trump's supporters, and Trump supporters will back this without actually digging into the details of it. They're relying on this, and we really have to drown out those voices. I really urge people to contact your senator, have them kill this bill. It's absolutely dangerous. It will dismantle American democracy, and especially the role of government. It fully expands government power to suppress us while completely reducing government's responsibility to us, right? And that's what they want.
It absolutely is. And senators do listen to phone calls. And so if your
Yeah,
senator is Republican, Democrat, independent, doesn't matter. Yeah, just to make sure that they fight it and they fight it hard, right?
absolutely.
We depend on your support here at the Zero Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.